Welcome to today's Flex webinar. I am your host, Marcus Merritt. Today, we're going to be talking about the most recent updates to Flex 5 and what's new. I wanted to do this specifically not because today's patch had a lot of new things, but there are a few specific really quality life things that aren't really listed or clear in the patch notes that I want to highlight because I think there's some really great little improvements and the kind of things that you see as we do those improvements in Flex 5 that we see just some little things we can do to add a lot of quality of life and kind of those simple improvements. So we're going to go ahead and share my screen and start taking a look at those. Okay, so just as a reminder always, when there's a new patch, which is every other Thursday, you can go to the megaphone on the what's new here, and you can pop that open to look at this, okay? So we're on patch 29, which is today, November 12th. So the first thing we wanna look at is we implemented the prep and return lists on the warehouse menu, okay? In probably I think it was 2 patches ago, I talked about how we had implemented the pull sheets and return sheets it's probably 2 ago. But you had to go to the exact project element, the edit page, and then you could open it. Now you can go to the main menu, to the warehouse menu, and then you can say, I would like to prep pull sheets. Okay, so now you can actually get the list. Now, right now, I don't have anything on here. I didn't build anything for this, and we're not really going to go detailed into those because the sheets themselves are not working any different. It's just the access. What I do want to talk about is this menu here itself. So one of the first things is that in Flex 4, when you would go to this, it would automatically do a filter that you had no control over that would do, say, I'm only going to look for things that are today plus 7 days, okay? And then if that didn't pull up what you were looking for, there was an all button up in the top that you could go to then get everything. And that was basically your only choice, is that initial filter or everything. In this, we've instituted the same kind of filters as the regular search list. It just automatically starts at a next 7 days. And again, this is actually today plus 7, not starting only tomorrow. It does include today. But then you really quickly, if you're like, oh, actually, I'm late on preparing this, but the customer said that wasn't a problem, then you could quickly go in here and say, well, let me change it to the last 7 days and hit that. Or you could still change it to all as the original. Or you could do any of the other default filters, including, and just as a note, this was specifically added in last patch 2 weeks ago, the ability to go custom, and then you can make it whatever date range you want that to be. Okay, so that's just kind of that nicer thing that it's doing the same filter to try to give you a shorter list. So you're not just pulling up hundreds of pull sheets, but you then have a lot more control over what that filter is going to do in case you need it to be slightly different. Okay, in the same way, this prep pull sheets in Flex 4 would use the warehouse scanning location. It would be down in the bottom of the screen. It would say the warehouse scanning location, and that filter would be included. And again, we've moved and it's not including that, but what it's doing is it's automatically filtering the warehouse portion of this dropdown so that that is taken care of, but you then have some control. Now, I've not actually enabled an additional location for this one, which is perfectly fine, but you see that it did automatically filter to my one location. And if I had others and my default or my current location was set differently, it would do that filter, but you could always change it, or you could say, hey, I need to see the rest of my system. I'm trying to double check for somebody else. You still obviously then also have all of the other filters that you could then use in there to help find your specific project if you're really busy, but these filters become a lot more helpful than just what was in the other one. There was a filter in the top, but it was kind of searching everything. And this, you have the ability to kind of more filter on all of those locations. The one quick note I want to mention on this is that if we instead go to the return manifests, instead of doing the prep date by the next 7 days, it now does return date last 7 days. And I think this one is even more important because in the previous, in Flex 4, it still just did next 7 days, return date next 7 days. And generally, you're not returning a lot of things early. You're going to be returning things that are supposed to be returning today or maybe yesterday. Now, you might get one thing back a day early, and so then it's not going to show up, and you can really quickly go, oh, well, let me get the next 7 days, and there it is. So you still have that ability to quickly adjust that filter, but it's still being a helpful filter, so you're not always having such a giant list, and you can work on that. I will say specifically, we don't want to make this list excessively long, but if there are, some other very good ideas of filters that we think we would want to kind of automatically put rather than just you building custom, we're happy to take that advice and take those things into consideration. So please feel free if you have some specific ideas on maybe a different automatic or quick filter in here, then feel free to use the send feedback button and give us some more ideas, and we will take those into consideration. It's possible we might put some others. For the moment, we think this is a pretty solid list of filters. Okay, so that's that key thing there on being able to get to the prep and return screen. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about really quick is that we're slowly adding as many of the system settings things that we can, especially the more simple ones that a newer customer might need to do in their initial setup, so they can do things in Flex 5 as much as possible. We're continuing to kind of work on those. They share a lot of the same kind of code, and so it's easier to do. So you'll see in here we've added shipping methods as a new one. Just as a note in this is kind of the reminder that these are just sort of a for your information kind of thing. It's not doing any calculations. It's not, it's not doing a lot of other adjustments, and it's just sort of a, helpful bit of information that you can communicate to you, to your staff, potentially to your customer, to let kind of know what's the plan for how you're getting the equipment to and from the venue, if that is, the thing of how it's happening. So just note that this doesn't do anything else super confusing, but pretty simple. You can just double click there, be able to edit that in there. And you can also instead just use the button there to edit or to delete, and you can also group delete, but I'm obviously not going to do that. Okay. The next thing on here that I want to highlight is I want to talk about this payment terms page. Okay. The big thing on this is one that I very commonly in my training have to do some extra explanation, because there are some wording problems in the way that it was stated in Flex 4, and we've updated that to hopefully make this a little more clear. So if I come back here to payment terms, okay, we see my existing payment terms. Again, I can add a new one by using the add payment term down here, or I can edit by either double clicking or clicking the 3-dot menu and then saying edit. Okay, so in this, let's just even open this 50 deposit / 50 net 30 and talk about this really quick to help make sure people understand how this works. Okay. The name is obviously just what it's named, how it's going to show up in your drop-down menu for the list. If you make sure that that terms shows up on the report you show to your customer, that's what they're going to see. And obviously, generally don't want to be too long. And so, kind of abbreviations like this are fairly common. So what we want to remind is this first one is the grace period. That's that net. That's of you're giving this customer terms. They're allowed to pay the final balance, whether it's the entire thing or in this case, 50% of it after the event. And you're saying from the end of the date, how long that is. Now, in this case, we're saying 30 days. Okay. Now, what we actually do is there is another setting, and I'm not going to show it. I just want to explain really quick that you can get that due date set based on that grace period to either be set based on the start of the event, the end of the event, or the date you prepare the invoice. And for different customers, it makes sense for different things. That would be set on both your quote document and your invoice document to make sure that they are in agreement with where that is set. But I've seen a lot of customers say, well, I want it to always be on the end of it. And some going, we're sometimes delayed. And when we create the project, we create the invoice. And so we need to instead make sure it's then, because the customer, if we're, 7 days late, and then we're saying, well, now you only have 3 days to pay your net 30, that doesn't feel like you're giving them net 30. So it's whatever makes sense for your organization on that, but that's what that grace period is. Okay, we're talking about that net, so that period after the event is over. Okay, now obviously for some shows you may say, well, we don't give net, especially during COVID. You know things are tighter on cash, and so you can still make that 0 if you need to. Okay, now our deposit percentage is if we're running any document where we're pulling deposit values, what is the percentage of math that it's going to figure on that? Okay, in this one we've said it's 50% deposit, so we made sure to fill in 50% here. It will then automatically do the math and come up with the solid number on that for it. It's pretty simple, straightforward there. The one that's always been confusing, in Flex 4, this next one always said due date period. And it wasn't the final due date, which was related to the grace period. It was the deposit due date. And I was regularly having to explain that to people. So we've made sure to add that text to make that more clear, that this is the deposit due date period. Now, unlike on the grace period where there's a little bit of flexibility in where you set that to be based on, this is always based on the start of the event, counting backwards in time that many days. So on this, you're saying, I want to get my 50% deposit 5 days before the event starts. Okay, that's when I want that to be due. You can make this lots of days. If you're saying, I want to get my check a month early, you can make it 30. Obviously, I can't make it by exact month, so you're going to say 30 or 31 or whatever you want to say in that sort of thing. Note also, it doesn't just count business days, it counts just days. And so it could be that 5 days means that it's due on a Saturday or a Sunday. And so it is important to note that once that gets pulled on the document automatically, you can always override it. You can always update that. It's just there to kind of help get those things started, get that sort of filled in initially, okay? The one thing I also want to mention on this is that right now we still only are kind of set up for a single deposit point, okay? Single deposit. Okay, so, but a lot of people, and again, under COVID, a lot of people have been going, no, what we do is we got to now get a 25% right up front, and then we start doing things, and then we want another 25%, and then we want 50% after, or maybe you're saying you want 33, 33, 33. There's all sorts of different ones. Currently, we are only set up for a single. Now, I will say that we have internally discussed, and I can make no promises that if and when this would happen, but we do think the idea of being able to add additional deposit periods, additional deposit points is a good idea. And so we do plan to look into that, but I again have no guarantee that that will happen, and if it does, when it would happen, okay? But note that it is something we have thought about and we do think is a good idea to look into. So that is something much farther into the development of Flex 5 that we will consider. But for the moment, I do want to show a workaround that I have shown for some people on this. Okay, so for this workaround, I'm going to make a new payment term that I'm going to edit one because I want to actually demo it and I don't want to have to turn off. So we're going to take our 50% deposit, 50 net 30, and we're going to change this to say, we want this to be a, let's just say for simpler math, let's say we want it to be 30, 30, 40. Okay, and that's just how we decide to name it. We want a 30% up front, we want 30% a little bit before the event, and we want the final 40% net 30. Okay, so we're still going to say we want it net 30. For this workaround, what we want to do is we want to set this deposit information based on this first deposit we're asking for. The workaround is going to be about how we get this second deposit. Okay, so we're in this case going to set the deposit to say 30%. And in this, let's say we want this first number 30 days out. Okay, so we're going to set this to say 30. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And then I'm going to go and make a new quote for this. So we're going to make a new quote. We're just going to call this deposit workaround. Let's set this out a ways so we know that our deposit's going to work. So let's say that it's early next year. So we'll say it's on the 12th of next year when it's going to load in, and it's going to be over by the end of that week. I don't need a lot of this, but let's make sure to put a little bit of information in here. Let's make this show to be for Chris. And that should get me enough of what I want. Now, again, a note right here is this deposit and deposit percentage are in this field, but that terms will automatically fill this information in for me. So I don't need to do anything with it right now. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and say accept. So now that we've created this quote, we want to go ahead and use that terms that we set up, that 30, 30, 40 terms. Okay. When first doing this, anytime you're checking terms of the deposit, it's always good to go and look at the header and to confirm that the math has been done right, and that's where you want it to be. It's also because you can edit this, override it. If you want to slightly change the deposit date or slightly round the deposit amount, you can always override that. But right now we're going to stick with the math that's automatically been done by our terms that we've created. So we're going to leave that and go ahead and run our deposit invoice here and take a peek at that. So we see there our deposit has been made. We get in here, knows what our total is. We want a 30% deposit, which is this much, and we will have a due date, and then it reminds that information down here at the bottom that this order requires a deposit of $766. Please remit that by this date. Okay, so that's that important part there. So now we're going to say that the client went ahead and paid that deposit. We're going to go ahead and enter the payment here, that they went ahead and sent us a check. We're going to say we got the payment today on the 17th. We're going to put a number here, and that they cut the check yesterday, and that the payment amount was that $766.80, at exactly 1/3. Okay. Now that that payment's in, when it gets to where the time we're trying to push to get this second 30%, we can do this override as part of our workaround, where we can now go back to the header, and now we can say, I want to get to 60%, the second 30%. It will redo the math here, but it's easier if you remove it, and then it knows to do this, and it'll update the math on that. And then the deposit due date will fix this. Now we're saying our job is on the 12th of January, and so maybe we say we want this to be like on the, just 5 days or so before that. So both of these have to be done manually. I can't currently do these with the automatic math in the deposit because we can currently only do one deposit payment. But if I override these here, it will update that, and just as to double check, we can pop back in here really quick and make sure. So it did the math, that 60% is now this $1,533.60. Okay, so then we can go back and we can run the deposit invoice again. So now this time when I've run it, it says, hey, we still have the same grand total for the quote. We want to get to 60%, which means we've got to get to this deposit, but it knows that there's a payment here of $766.80. So it's saying, hey, this order requires us to get to $1,533.60. So please submit another $766.80 by this date. Okay, that's that key thing of what we're saying is I need to get to this total number, but we know how much you've given me, so I need the remaining balance to get to that number. Okay, it's similar to if you had the deposit and you're trying to get to the remaining. It's saying, hey, we know you've paid the remaining, so we need the balance to get done. But in this, we can set that secondary tier of where our balance is trying to get. So that's that kind of key there for the workaround on being able to do that. Since I'm digging into this, talking about this, one thing I wanted to highlight that was added in this patch specifically today is you can have in your system this deposit exact number enabled or the deposit percentage enabled, or is in this system both. Okay, and it's just specifically some people only put the flat number value, and there is a reason, because in Flex 4 it was working, in Flex 5 it wasn't until this patch, where you can actually on the deposit say, hey, I want this to be 50%, and you can fill it in there and save it, and then it will do the math and update that information properly in here. So it doesn't quite update this, but it will fix the other. Oh, except that's not right. It's supposed to. Maybe because I made it higher, it overrode me, and or because I did this. My understanding is it works, but we'll have to look at that. It might be because I've already screwed with the settings on it. It's kind of trying to save my previous override. But that should now work if you're a customer who already kind of uses that. And so feel free to kind of test that out, play with that. Always as a reminder, if there are specific topics you would like me to cover in future webinars, please send those to training@flexrentalsolutions.com. Always, if you have questions, you can email to support@flexrentalsolutions.com, and always use the Help Center to help in those additional things. Again, as that last minute reminder, there is a Thanksgiving in 2 weeks, so no webinar in 2 weeks. Next one will be on December 10th, 4 weeks from today. Thank you again, and have a great day.